The next loan is a package mortgage, which pretty good title for this loan because it is a package deal where typically the financing includes real property and personal property. The two are kind of packaged together. Now, why does this matter? And I will tell you, this is kind of important when you're practicing real estate and trying to keep you out of trouble here when you start writing offers and so forth. But typically when you take out a loan to buy a house, you obviously you're going to have a mortgage involved. You can only finance real property in that loan. Okay, personal property should not be there or included. Now, what you'll see a lot of times is they'll in the contract of sale they might write in, seller to convey refrigerator, which is personal property, at no charge. Again, the agents do that because you cannot finance personal property in that mortgage, right? That's a no-no. So you better be very careful about how you word stuff in offers because a lot of times they may put in the contract without any compensation or without any charge or cost or whatever, but they've included in the sales price of the house. And I will tell you, that could be considered mortgage fraud. So just be careful there. You cannot finance in a typical mortgage both real property and personal property. Maybe they have a riding lawnmower and they said, well, for an additional $500, I'll leave my lawnmower. That cannot be included in the financing, okay, because that lawnmower is personal property. Well, an exception here is called a package mortgage. So again, if you work this out with the lender and get a package mortgage, now you could include personal property that will be conveyed along with the real property, with value. Where you see this most common is with commercial buildings, maybe that's already furnished or what have you. But typically the furnishings would be considered personal property that has value, and we want to include that with the sales price. Well, the only way you can finance both the personal and real property together, you have to get approved for a package mortgage. So that's what they're talking about. So package means we're financing both real and personal property all together. Then there's the straight line loan. Again, I'm not sure how common this is, but need to know what it is in case they ask you on the exam, I guess. But straight line loan. It does say you're going to have consistent principal payments. So remember, typically when you make a payment each month, it includes both principal and interest. And with this straight line loan, that means whatever your principal payment is, it's going to stay the same for the life of the loan. However, with this type of loan, as you make your payments, and obviously your balance, what you owe, is decreasing, the amount of interest you owe will now begin to decrease as well. So you'll actually see the total payment you make over the life of the loan, as the further you get towards the end of the loan, the lower your payment's going to get. So the advantage is, even though you may have the larger payments up front initially, over time these payments will start coming down. Not because your principal's decreased, but because the amount of interest you're paying has decreased. So, if you decide to get one of those, let me know how it works out. All right, that's the straight line loan. And then there's a conventional loan. We've already talked about this a little bit, but we will review real fast. Remember, what's the loan to value ratio for a conventional loan? Remember, that was 80%. meaning the buyer would have to put 20% down. However, could they potentially get a conventional loan and borrow more than 80%? Maybe they go to 90% or even 95%. Y'all, they can, but if you borrow more than 80% with a conventional loan, what are you going to also have to pay? Remember that PMI, y'all, that private mortgage insurance. And then we also discussed when you can get rid of that insurance. And I promise you, you want to get rid of it as fast as you can because it's expensive. But y'all, once you have 20% equity in the property, you can go ahead and request the lender to drop the PMI. And y'all, you need to ask them to do that. Otherwise, they're going to keep charging it. I promise you. But once there's 22% equity in the property, y'all, now the lender has to drop it. Y'all, that's the law. They have to drop the PMI whether you've asked them to or not. So at 20%, you can ask to drop it. 22%, they have to drop it. All right, that's the conventional loan. Excuse me. And then this next one is called the sale and lease back. And I will tell you, this loan works exactly what that title suggests. So that should be a pretty easy one for you if you're asked about it. Y'all, this is where the property owner decides to sell the property, but then once they close on it, y'all sold, then the seller actually would turn right back around and lease the property back from the buyer. Okay? Y'all, it's called a sale and lease back. And y'all, there are a number of reasons something like this would be used. But probably one of the biggest reasons and advantages with a sell and lease back is the owner, even though they've sold the property, they still can have the rights to use the property because now they're leasing it, but they don't have all their money tied up into the property, right? So they still have the opportunity to use the asset without having all their capital tied up in owning the property. So, that's a sale and lease back. And then this next loan is the negative amortization. And this is quite negative, to say the least. I will tell you, this is probably not something you would want to get unless you really knew you were going to pay it off quickly. Because y'all, here's the issue with a negative amortization. First of all, it's just an interest-only loan, okay? So you're not paying down any principal. So none of your payments going towards paying off the loan. You're only making interest payments. The problem with this is you're not even paying all the interest you owe. So basically, you're just making a partial interest payment and no principal payment. So if you think about it, y'all, every day you have this loan, the amount you still owe on it is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. You owe more and more and more, if I say it that way, because you're paying no principal and you're only making partial interest payments. You're not even paying all the interest you owe each month. So that's why they call it a negative amortization. So obviously, this is not something you want to have very long. Seems too risky for me. Don't believe I'd want that. But that's the negative amortization.